and welcome to another Austin Software Cooperatives meetup. Today we're going to continue a book review of The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. This is part 2. We'll see how far we get. Go ahead and check out part 1. It should be up on our YouTube channel. We're going to have a mind map, some notes and discussion today, and then we'll look at what other books or topics that we may want to discuss in the future. All right, Watson.
Hey, all right. So I believe the thrust of what we were trying to get through in the last meetup, I believe we got up to maybe chapter 6 or 8. But basically, to review a bit, surveillance capitalism in general, probably go through the definition here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. It's a new economic order that claims human experience as free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. One of the main takeaways of the book is going to be, people know that they're being monitored, but it's worse than what you think. It's not just monitoring. There's more monitoring going on than what you think is going on. But there's also a prediction market that's happening. They are selling what you're going to do. It isn't just monitoring, and that's where the real value is. On top of that, it's moving towards deciding what you're going to do. So nudging you, if you've ever heard or read of the book Nudge, maybe we'll review it. But it was popular, I don't know, about 15 years ago. Nudging you in certain directions. And we reviewed in the last, I want to say at the end of the last meetup, that Facebook had the ability to get people to vote in certain directions. First, to go out and vote, and second, to vote in certain directions. There's all types of terrifying things as far as what they'll know about you. So, for instance, one thing that is startling is that they know when you're pregnant before you know. Based on if you purchase different fragrances, they can predict with a high probability that you're pregnant and then target you. So again, to review, there's something called the dispossession cycle, where first you're startled by what's being monitored and what's being sold. If you find out about it, there's a big portion of the surveillance capitalism is directed towards keeping a lot of what's being monitored secret. But if you do find out, there's something called the dispossession cycle, which gets you to, for the data that you believe that you possess, which is what startles you, to get you to dispossess it. So for you to say, oh, I don't care about that anyways, whatever little maxims or beliefs might be out there, kind of, if you don't have anything to hide, if you're not doing anything wrong, all of that stuff. Well, after you do that, something like, say, and I keep coming back to example of pregnancy, that's being sold to different algorithms that can predict, and we'll get into, but that can give you a score that can say things like employability or loanability and that type of thing. So that's where we're at right now. Let's see here. I believe we got to chapter 8. Let's go ahead and take a look here. So essentially, chapter 8 was taking what's in the real world about your data. So they can different terms for it, but one of the terms is data exhaust, things that you think are useless, but are useful for creating a prediction market about your behavior, taking those things and rendering them into some format that's proper for purchase. Let's see here. And that goes into different types of modes of monitoring. But I believe we went through this in general, but that's it. That's what this is about. Spend too much time on this. Let's see, we have chapter 9 hanging out here. Yeah, so I believe we're going to chapter 10. So what I thought was going to be important and why we definitely needed another review was what Shoshana Zuboff calls instrumentarianism. So basically the portion where they're nudging you or controlling you to go in certain directions. This could be the simplified idea of trying to get you to return to Facebook or return to whatever social media is there, and kind of getting you addicted and having all of those effects in you, which would like shorten attention span and all that. That's actually, small piece. There's other pieces that are more, I guess, profitable for surveillance capitalism. And again, the author is coming up with a new form of exploitation. So normal capitalism is talking about industrial exploitation, division of labor, and the capture of what you could call the surplus, which is to simplify the profit, and getting workers to basically give up some of their rights to whatever they're creating to elites. This is a new form. Things that you produce, basically your what's called the data exhaust, things about your life and your behavior are given up, even though you produce them. Someone else is capitalizing on them and you don't get a say in how that is being used, or you don't get to profit from it. And then that's now being used to predict what you're going to do, number one. Number two, to control you, basically nudge you. So this meetup, I'm going to try to go over all of the control portion. A lot of this, I want to say the author had to do a lot of digging. I said in the last review, the author is very rigorous. I was very impressed by how rigorous they were in trying to find out a lot about a secretive process. Part of the process of surveillance capitalism is being secret. She revisits that, but basically, it's essential to surveillance of, it can be animals through telemetry, of monitoring deer, beavers, whatever. She uses a couple examples, or humans that you don't want to disturb what you're monitoring. So it's kind of essential to surveillance to be invisible. And that's being used on us, essentially. So we don't know some of this, so that makes it very difficult. And to kind of do kind of a preview, if we get to it, some of the leaders in surveillance capitalism, so we're going to talk about Google, Facebook, and some others, they don't really talk about the theory that much, but there are other academics who have papers that they published that talk extensively about the theory. And then you can see some of what they verbalized in the papers being mimicked in the some of the executives' speeches. So you can kind of infer some things there. So that's kind of the process of what she's going through. So let's get into this. So the new powers action, a senior software engineer told me, the intelligence of the Internet of Things means that sensors can also be actuators. The director of software engineering for a company is that is an important player in the Internet of Things. Added there, it's no longer simply about ubiquitous computing. It's about the real aim is now the real aim is ubiquitous intervention, action, and control. The real power is that now you can modify real-time actions in the real world. Connected smart sensors can register and analyze any kind of behavior and then actually figure out how to change it. Real-time analytics translate into real-time action. Scientists and engineers I've interviewed call this new capability actuation. And they describe it as a critical, though largely undiscussed, turning point in the evolution of the apparatus of ubiquity. So you've got a couple different terms, like the term cloud, which is ubiquitous computing, but really it's kind of on the back end, on servers, so on and so forth. Then you've got the Internet of Things, which from the sources that Zuboff presents, the real power in it, or the real value in it's going to be the surveillance. And here you can see some of the end game here. That a stronger form of capturing of data and a quicker response, which can get from the, how, and we'll get into it possibly, but a quicker response, which can be from prediction models. You can call it machine intelligence if you want, that are closer to the humans, that can get a response from the humans. We are going to have to move pretty fast. Let's see here. So we've got different terms here, herding and conditioning being openly discussed. We're going to have to get into B.F. Skinner. So we talk about B.F. Skinner. He's not the creator of behavioralism, but he's a popularizer of behavioralism. Basically, he had a view that the world would be better if controlled from the view of tuners, let's say, could be psychologists or what have you. And that behaviorism is the key, understanding that an understanding can be derived from of human behavior that can kind of be derived from like kind of like a feedback loop. You can kind of derive certain behaviors from observations, and then you can make predictions, and then you can turn around and influence human behavior based off of what you've observed. B.F. Skinner was pretty big on kind of that freedom of your will, like free will is kind of an illusion, and that we shouldn't leave society to free will. We should try to, or you could say the smart people, the tuners, should be tuning free will. He was completely rejected. But as we're going to see, hopefully we get to, the newer theorists were a little bit more savvy about how they presented B.F. Skinner's views, and they're more accepted. So I'm going to try to go over this quickly. Essentially, Facebook, and we'll also say Google, they learned that they can do a lot of manipulation based off of capturing your data. They did lots of experimentation. We talked about this in the last meeting a bit, but essentially what I think is worthy of review. In the 70s, there was a huge change in legislation that put regulation on how humans were, let's say, monitored or studied, the types of experiments that could be done on humans, because of different experiences that were done in the past that were unethical. One of them is the CIA's experiments that they were doing on humans with the MK Ultra program, and also what created a lot of controversy was B.F. Skinner's book Walden 2, and he had another book, I believe it was called Beyond Freedom of Will, something to that extent. Those two things and some other things made it to where there was a big congressional hearing, and people put forward, the congressman put forward rules about how you can do experimentation on humans. And in general, you can't do certain things that are going to manipulate people to where they're going to have all kinds of long-lasting effects on them, and so on and so forth. Well, with Facebook, and that largely applied to academia. With Facebook and other groups that are capturing large amounts of data and then can put forward different experiments, they are insulated from these rules. So some of academia kind of gravitated towards your Facebooks and other places, And but there's experimentation that's been done on people, and some of what was thought to be kind of sci-fi is not so much sci-fi as far as controlling people. So again, to go back to the old CIA, MK Ultra, kind of the stuff of conspiracies, there were experiments that were done on humans, and it was a lot of it was looked or frowned upon as junk science and doesn't work. You can't brainwash people and all that. Well, some of some of what Facebook was doing and other groups, it seems like you can push people in certain directions, and so control actually is possible. The ethics of it fell into question, and that's really what this chapter is about. So like here, public outcry was substantial. If Facebook can tweak emotions and make us vote, what else can it do? The Guardian asked. The Atlantic quoted the study's editor, who had processed the article for publication despite her apparent misgivings. She told the magazine, as a private company, Facebook did not have to adhere to legal standards for experimentation. So you can see this kind of loophole that is out there. All right, so that's basically what this whole chapter is about. The Pokemon Go. So that was a game that behind the scenes was really Google. Basically, there are lots of people who were, their movements were monitored and managed and nudged in certain directions. And it was really proven that people can be herded in certain directions, like into a pizzeria. And it could be the case that the pizzeria purchases foot traffic into the into a place of business. So it started out as a game, and it ended up being this big social experiment. Any questions so far on this whole Make Them Dance chapter? So we got a lot to go through, so I'm going to force my way through here. So this chapter on the right to will, the author Zuboff quotes Hannah Arendt a lot, who kind of is the authority on totalitarianism. She was writing right after World War II, and during World War II, right after. So you have Italy's Mussolini, you have Germany and Hitler, and you have Stalinism. To summarize what totalitarianism is, it's really the capture of what she talks about as the soul, but it's really the capture of the internal private thoughts of people. And it was unprecedented. So before the writings of Mussolini and Stalin and Hitler, so on and so forth, it really wasn't something that people could predict. This is kind of counterintuitive, because you kind of think, people were, their internal thoughts and all that was being controlled forever. But it's really not the case. Even during monarchies, so on and so forth, you may think that there are certain like religions and so on and so forth were kind of controlling people's internal thoughts, and really it really wasn't to the degree of totalitarianism. Within totalitarianism, the it was the from the inception of it with Mussolini, the aim was to control internal thought through, and that would be your work life, of course, your religious life. Maybe in some instances it was to eliminate religious life, and your even the people, in quotes, were to be above your family and any other kind of allegiances that you may have, or alliances. So and then so that would be your private, and then your public, your voting, whatever it is. So your political life, there would be no difference between the two, and all of it would be controlled. This was the aim for Mussolini and Stalin and Hitler. So totalitarianism is not fascism. Fascism does a couple extra steps. You've got the merging of let's say corporate life and political life, those types of things. Totalitarianism is kind of a superset of that. So why does this matter? In the end, the author is saying that this surveillance capitalism is kind of a new form of totalitarianism. It's very close. It isn't exactly the same. The methodology is not the same. The way it goes about capturing is not the same. And the incentives are not the same. But the part of it with the trying to capture the internal and control, that is the same. And so that's really what some of the chapter is about. Again, there's some weird analogies with or parallels, I should say, with B.F. Skinner, so the behavioral psychologist, and the let's see here. All right, the behavioral psychologist, and some of the writings of Mussolini and some of the totalitarian writings. Let's see here. So one of the things is this reduction of free will that B.F. Skinner talks about. And then you have Zuboff making an argument that free will is what makes you human within this chapter. So if you, and she presents a couple different arguments, but you have B.F. Skinner coming through and saying that free will is really just ignorance. It's ignorance of how the mechanics work. So you're really determined, and as we cut away at what the environment is that determines your behavior, we cut away at free will. So it's kind of like a argument against the God of the gaps, really. That's how I look at it. It's the only reason why you believe in free will is because you don't know what the mechanics are, is the view of B.F. Skinner. And he puts forward a couple of consequences of that. Is with ignorance, it's anti-scientific, and it allows for, with B.F. Skinner, it allows for these antiquated methods of managing the humans to take place. So you could have class wars, you can have racism, right? You could have the class wars of Stalin, you could have the racism of Hitler only because of, you know, paradoxically, only because of the belief of free will. And Skinner's view is that there should be we should try to do our best to scientifically eliminate this free will and instantiate some kind of, later on she talks about policies or what have you, ways of managing top down everyone. And again, her pushback is that a lot of what you believe, for instance, a simple idea of what a promise is, right? So to make a promise is to predict the future. To fulfill a promise through the exercise of will turns that prediction into fact. She talks about John Searle, who's a philosopher of the mind, and Hannah Arendt, who talks about the will as an organ. Again, about totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is about trying to reduce the will, but their view was more, it was kind of more of a, almost like a spiritual reduction. And then the behaviorist is going to be more of a controlling or knowledge about the environment. But two end goals the same. So that her view, though, is that she's taking a stance that free will is what the human is, and that Skinner did not do a good job of trying to say that just because something is observed, you know, you can observe everything, but that doesn't mean you explain everything, essentially. And then there are implications, which turn into things that look very similar to totalitarianism. We already talked about data exhaust and prediction products. The biggest groups that are involved with surveillance capitalism are going to be Google and Facebook, but she reiterates multiple times that even if you were to eliminate those two groups, the cat's out the bag. There's too many smaller groups, companies that are all about this theory and way of making money. So you can't just do, this isn't a situation where it's a monopoly, and if you could just break apart the monopoly, you would solve the problem. No, it's worse than that. You know, a bunch of companies or one company, doesn't matter. The biggest, and I'll skip forward. One of the biggest thing or problem with the surveillance capitalism is that there is no democratic oversight or democratic input into these decisions. What the tuners make, it's kind of a top-down problem of who monitors the monitors, who watches the watchers. We don't have that. And that's really what the critique, the thrust of the critique is going to be. Yeah, here we're talking about people generally disagree with being surveilled. Surveillance capitalists don't care, essentially. There's lots of surveys out there, and there's a methodology for getting around that. People don't like it. All types of rationalizations, and those rationalizations actually work. Those strategies work against people's resistance to being surveilled. Let's go to the next chapter here. We got these two species of power. We might have already talked about this. So we talked about this a bit. Totalitarianism. One of the things is it was unprecedented. And so the author takes a stance that things that are unprecedented are obviously hard to deal with. Totalitarianism was unprecedented. You had Stalin and Hitler, on the front page of or on the cover of multiple magazines like Time. People didn't know what was going on at the time. And only later did they find out that millions of people were being killed. And that this was really kind of a reign of terror and coercion. And then you even had some rationalizations of those regimes, even with all the killing. So basically saying, well, they got healthcare, they have free school, a bunch of other things. Only took, lots of people being killed. So totalitarianism is odd, and it swept through really fast, relatively. She compares that to surveillance capitalism sweeping through. People don't know about it. They know about the minimum. You're being monitored and all that. They don't know about the prediction. They don't know about the instrumentation, what she calls it. And by the time people figure it out, it could be too late, kind of thing. But there's parallels, but then there are things that are definitely different. So surveillance capitalism obviously is not based on terror. It's not based on killing lots of people and saying you better act correct, that kind of thing. It's more about these nudges that we mentioned earlier. By the way, the authors from Harvard, B.F. Skinner is in Harvard, they actually had conversations in the hallways of Harvard, disagreements. And she was obviously younger, but she had direct correspondence with the author. Here we have Skinner. So there's kind of a direct line between Skinner and the surveillance capitalists, but it's kind of veiled. But she tries to tease it out. So here, Skinner understood that the engineering of behavior risked violating individual sensibilities and social norms, especially concerns about privacy. In order to allay these anxieties, he advised that observation must be unobtrusive, ideally remaining outside the awareness of the organism. Behavior may also be observed with a minimum of interaction between subject and scientist, and this is the case with which one naturally tries to begin. Right, so that is being followed. So more is being surveilled than what you think. We're going to talk more about utopia in the next chapter. Interesting about Skinner, he didn't believe in free markets. He didn't believe in the regimes of Stalin. Like, he didn't believe in Marxism. He didn't believe in existentialism. That obviously, existentialism, a big part of that is free will. He didn't believe in religion. His thing was really what he thought was like a scientific management of what people would do. And that was his utopia. So he didn't, the author talks about Skinner did not live to see what he would talk about in Walden 2, his book, which was compared with Orwell's book, they were kind of, they really were about this. She says they kind of, at first glance, they're about the same thing, but they're really not. And then Orwell's book was looked at as a masterpiece, and Walden's book is, people didn't read it, and when the ones who people who did read it called it a nightmare, mostly because he was serious about what he was writing, and then Orwell was like a cautionary tale. But that's really that chapter. Let's go into chapter 13. I really want to try to get to the Instrumentarian, chapter 15 for sure. So the curse. One of the things about the author talks about this total certainty, or the word certainty. And that's what the surveillance capitalists want to get to. They want to sell a product that predicts what you're going to do, and with some level of certainty. So it's not 100% certainty, but they're going to sell it like it is. And so that's what you're up against, right? And they've been working really hard on trying to reduce any friction in between getting certainty, not you, but any friction between them and getting certainty for what you're going to do. All right, so here we go. This instrumentarianism is a new species of power. Surveillance capitalism is a puppet master that imposes its will through the medium of ubiquitous digital apparatus. I now name the apparatus the big other, right? So this is, she uses the language of big other. Big other is just pregnant with meaning. Lots of authors have used that phrase with things like really philosophy. But she's using it in the sense of this thing watching you, and that really it is, that connotation is throughout the use and within the different authors. So her big other is going to be the computation and the tuners, people who tune the computation of the predictive analysis. In the original meetup, we talked about neoliberalism. And so here she says, instrumentarian power cultivates an unusual way of knowing that combines the formal indifference of the neoliberal worldview with the observational perspective of radical behaviorism. So it's kind of, before you would have, with totalitarianism, there was a top-down control. With neoliberal, there's at least the illusion that markets are doing the controlling, but it's behind the scenes still elites doing the controlling. So that's kind of the difference there. This was interesting. Forget the cliche that if it's free, you are the product. You are not the product. You are the abandoned carcass. The product derives from the surplus that is ripped from your life. So this indifference here that she was talking about earlier, we really don't care about you. And that seems to be, it seems to work well with capital. You're kind of indifferent with, if you're successful, if you're happy in your life, then that's good. If you're not, then that doesn't matter. This was an interesting quote. So in Instrumentarian utopia, Big Other simulates the vortex of stimuli, transforming natural selection into the unnatural selection of variation and reinforcement authored by market players and the competition for surveillance revenues. Right. So some of this was from a personal discussion that she had at Harvard with the psychology department, or either it was directly with B.F. Skinner, or I believe it was something that was written in an elevator, where basically it says something along the lines of, and making a joke, that God is really a vortex of stimuli that is able to do that. It predicts what you're going to do or affects what you're going to do, more or less. So kind of making a play on words on what people's belief systems are. Let's see here. Well, we talked about already about the friction. Basically, anything between a surveillance capitalist and the prediction model is really just friction, and it is to be reduced, minimized, destroyed, or whatever. The moral view from their standpoint is that you're really being reactionary, Luddite, like you're trying to resist technology, so on and so forth. So internally, within some of the surveillance capitalists groups, companies, or what have you, there's kind of an ethical stance that the people that are there resisting, they're really ignorant, and they're kind of they don't really see the end goal, and they're going to come around when they see the benefits, so on and so forth. So there's kind of an ethical component of this. So let's see here. One of the things Hannah Arendt said, or brought up earlier, was that one of the problems with reasoning about totalitarianism is that some of it worked. Some of it brought about some things like free university and healthcare, things like that. And so that really complicated things. The author says that that's also a problem with surveillance capitalism, because, and that's what's brought up, if you're wanting some of these, like say the Google Assistant or the Microsoft Assistant, some of the benefits that it brings to you, which they're saying are going to be tremendous, you're going to have to give up some of your privacy. And so that's really what makes a lot of the difficulty with trying to combat surveillance capitalism come to bear. So here is some interesting things. So far, I'm going to stop and see what people have to say so far about what we talked about, because we're about to get into the next portion. So anybody have any comments? All right, so we're rounding the hour. High level on the China. So China is really big on surveillance capitalism. They have a social credit system that was originally developed by the central bank, Chinese central bank, and some other, I want to say, was it the Sesame credit system? And they found out that they can do lots of predictions, and they said, oh, First it was the bank that was doing this, and they were going to go ahead and allow people to get loans, so on and so forth, based off of the social credit score. And then, of course, the government wanted to take it over. Some of what they're saying that they were denying, buying plane tickets, train tickets, rail tickets, building a house, enrolling their children in expensive fee-paying schools, joining or being promoted in the party or the army, receiving honors and titles. Those are some of the things that they would reject. The bank also said that they prevented people from flying 6 million times and buying high-speed train tickets 2 million times. So that's some of the repercussions of the social credit score. And the argument to try to push forward is that we also have a credit score. So Chinese users, as in comparison, are rendered, classified, and queued up for prediction with every digital touch. So are we. We're ranked on Uber, eBay, Facebook, and many other businesses, and those are only the rankings that we see. Chinese users are assigned a character score, whereas U.S. government urges the tech companies to train their algorithms for a radicalism score. Indeed, the work of the shadow text, which is all of everything that's the algorithm and everything that's captured that you don't know about, is to evaluate, categorize, and predict our behavior in millions of ways that we can neither know nor combat. These are our digital dossiers. Right? So this is what's going on. We have credit scores. She talked about a company called Cornerstone that does an employment score for you, that companies can purchase the Cornerstone HR system, and they can access this employability recommendation that includes all kinds of things that we don't know about. And so we have these two graphics. We need to go ahead and share this on the meetup group with these comparisons between totalitarianism and instrumentarianism. What's it called? Big brother, big other, total certainty, possession, so on and so forth. I want to get to the next chapter. Let's see. Force over there. This is generally speaking, as far as there's a view, utopianism is a view that things are going to happen in the future, and it's a view, a dream, an idea, and it affects people in the present because they want to. It makes them want to move or work towards that utopia. Utopia can be used in a negative sense, and saying it's kind of false, and it's a way of manipulation. And it can be used in a positive sense. Mostly, when people use the word utopia, they're using it in a negative sense, something that cannot be achieved, but it's put out there probably by some group that is just trying to control you. So there was something that jumped out at me in this chapter. The imaginative range of this new thinking is demonstrated by a 2013 Microsoft patent application, updated and republished in 2016, entitled User Behavior Monitoring in a Computerized Device, with conspicuously thin theory complemented by thick practice. the patented device is designed to monitor user behavior in order to preemptively detect any deviation from normal or acceptable behavior that is likely to affect the user's mental state. A prediction model corresponding to features of one or more mental states may be compared with features based upon current user behavior. So this is a patent for something that's going to allow not only do the monitoring, but it's going to do the nudging based off of your reactions in the real world. And these devices, they were called, you can call them wearables or what have you. These devices not only notify you, but they notify your local network. And again, you could be saying, oh, this is shocking, might be shocking, all that. All of these devices, of course, this is just a patent, but all of these devices are already in play. They're already being used, Fitbit's being used, your smartwatches, all this stuff like that. They're already in play. They're already sending the data and training the models, and the predictive models are already being purchased. So this is just a patent showing that they actively wanted to do this in 2013. So psychological events, some of the things that they were trying to sell this to, the device would alert trusted individuals such as family members, doctors, or caregivers, but the circle widens as the patent specifications unfold. Scientists note that the utility of alerts for healthcare providers, insurance companies, and law enforcement personnel. So all of that is there. The author is pretty good about putting things out there that, okay, yeah, it seems like they would be doing that. And then she gives you a real example of things that can be startling, that are already in play. So I want to try to get to some of that. So here we got, this is a chapter. You're going to read about instrumentarianism. This chapter here is where we really get into it. So there is somebody named Pitman. And they say, Alex Pitman says the quiet parts out loud. He is the theorist that people go to have the rationale. He's his undergrad, his doctoral students are the ones creating all the wearables and all this, so on and so forth. And his research is a research that gets the surveillance capitalists excited. So whereas previously it was kind of we're going to train up a model, maybe we'll be able to do some prediction and all that. This person with his undergrads, they're the ones that were doing a lot of really the hard data science that was showing that the prediction models really work, and that people's intuition, as far as programmers, people who were trying to model people's predictive behavior and all that stuff, that their intuition was correct, and he had a new model for doing it. He is pretty rhetorically savvy. He does not try to talk like B.F. Skinner, but he really says the same things that B.F. Skinner says in a veiled way, a nicer way. Essentially, he won't go all the way and say that free will it doesn't exist. He'll say it's really like a bump in all of the data. It's there. It could be there. We'll never be able to eliminate all of it, all of that stuff. But we're trying to concentrate on everything around that. So he was much more rhetorically savvy. So there's no pushback against Alex Pitman. He's on, I want to say 40-ish, somewhere in here, 40-ish different boards and companies that are doing something, have something to do with surveillance capitalism. He's author of like maybe 100 papers, I want to say. And he's going to be, they call him the godfather of the Google Glass. And really his book, I want to say, where is it at here? I think it's, the name of it is Social Fabric, is really one of the go-to books. Of course, his doctoral students also have published a bunch of books on this view, on surveillance capitalism. So what he really but the thing that he did differently was he had this view of it's called the God's eye view. So essentially, the same way that you would kind of monitor flocks of birds instead of individual birds, like groups, migrations, so on and so forth. He calls it the God's eye view. So taking a step back and looking at the population instead of individuals. But you would do that with technology. You do that with telemetry, having sensors on the individual agents, but ignoring the individuality and trying to get what word that I'll use is supervenes, get what emerges or supervenes on the group. That's really where you can get the prediction. And so he has a bunch of empirical studies that he did. Let's see here. And then this is kind of his history. So essentially, his counterintuitive finding of his, let's say with your social media, you may think that, okay, what I choose to reveal, that's going to be something that will have a lot of predictive weight. So if I say, oh, I'm going to get married next month or those sides, and his thing is the things that you don't choose, just your behavior of where you're at. The data exhaust phrase, I think, comes from him. That is much more powerful in prediction than what you choose or not choose to reveal. So this is a history of all types of wearable sensors, going back to, let's see here, I want to say it's 2005-ish or previous, where they started doing monitoring of small groups with sensors, monitoring people's facial expressions, their sounds, inflection of voice, just wherever they're moving, all that, who they are around, that kind of thing. And then they started being able to determine with greater and greater precision what people were going to do. So we have here tone of voice, whom they interact, if they lean in, their position in the social network across a variety of office situations, much more. They were able to produce 40 separate measures that are then integrated within a business metric dashboard. And this is, when is this? 2015. So this is kind of after they were doing a whole lot of iterative testing of this thing. This is one of his companies. The company does not identify as client organizations, although one account describes its work with 10,000 employees in Bank of America's customer service centers in a partnership with the consulting firm Deloitte. So writing in Scientific American and the power of sociometric data, Pitman says, I persuaded a manager of the Bank of America call center to schedule coffee breaks simultaneously. The goal was to promote more engagement between employees. This single change resulted in a productivity increase of $15 million a year. So this stuff is in effect. Let's see here. All right, so the there's a list here of everybody that he consults. One of them is the World Economic Forum. And essentially, a lot of his writing is going towards the utopianism of B.F. Skinner. Essentially, he wants to have his models implemented at the government layer and not just like the market layer or individual company layer. Oop. So here the author's comparing Pitman with Skinner. Again, to reiterate, Skinner's stuff was so startling that they made ethical rules on how you do experiments on people. So the Congress did. So this is kind of a thin, my description is kind of a thin layer over B.F. Skinner's ways of doing experimentation on people and controlling people. So comparison: behavior for the greater good. Skinner emphasized that the need for an urgent shift to a collective perspective and values, the intentional design of a culture and the culture of human behavior are essential if the human species are to continue to develop. And Pitman, basically, to move forward, he has a thin layer over that, but basically says the same. Plans replace, this is principle number 2, plans replace politics. Skinner yearned for the computational capabilities that would perfect behavioral prediction and control, enabling perfect knowledge to supplant politics as the means of collective decision making. Pitman basically says the same thing, having a mathematical predictive science of society that includes both individual differences and relationships between individuals. Pitman writes, has the potential to dramatically change the way government officials, industry managers, and citizens think and act. 3, social pressure for harmony. Okay, so in the community of Walden 2, which is Skinner's book, which is the comparison to George Orwell's book, reinforcement is precisely orchestrated to eliminate the emotions that threaten cooperation. Only productive and threatening emotions, joy and love, are allowed. Feelings of sorrow and hate and high voltage excitements of anger, fear, and rage are considered wasteful and dangerous threats to the needs of modern life. Pitman's idea is comparable. Social physics approach to getting everyone to cooperate is social network incentives. His version of reinforcement, with such incentives, he explains, we focus on changing the connections between people rather than focusing on getting people individually to change their behavior, so on and so forth. 4, applied utopistics. Both Skinner and Pitman believe in the authority of the utopianists to impose their plan. So there's going to be some top level tuners. And the death of individuality. Individuality is a threat to instrumentation society, a troublesome friction that sucks energy from collaboration, harmony, and integration. Now, I've already said, like, Skinner doesn't believe in free will. It says that it's kind of it's ignorance and it's in the way of progress. Let's go to Pitman. In a lecture at Google that garnered enthusiastic applause, Pitman flattered the audience by signaling that the digital cognoscenti will easily accept the obsolescence of the individual as necessary fate. What about free will? He asked the audience to the audience in modern view. That may not have occurred to you, but that's the traditional thing to ask. He went on to explain that most human behavior, from political views to spending choices to the music that people listen to, is predicted by what's cool to do, exposure to what other people do. Many people reject this idea, he noted, because it's not a rhetoric in our society. If you ever get a chance to look up Chomsky's takedown of B.F. Skinner, it is, I will argue that this is the most famous takedown of someone not in a field kind of making a whole nother field irrelevant. Like, Chomsky is not a psychologist, and people point to him as creating one of the best arguments against a view within psychology. So not all psychologists are behaviorists. I don't know. None of the ones that I've met personally are behaviorists. And it's a lot of it is because it's really, I won't say just simple to have arguments against, but Chomsky's views come kind of from language and how language develops. And so he's pretty famous. A lot of his YouTube videos are going back and forth. So I will argue, because Chomsky is so powerful in his arguments against, and those arguments he brings that are against behaviorism, Pitman doesn't really try to go pure behaviors. He sidesteps the risk of Skinner's views by taking a softer tone. Some people react negatively to the social phrase, or to the phrase social physics, because they feel that it implies people are machines without free will, without the ability to move independently on our role in society. Right? Pitman acknowledges that humans have a capacity for independent thought, but insists that social physics does not need to try to account for it. He sees that the problem is not that the independent thought is omitted from the picture, but rather that internal, unobservable thought processes are just friction that will occasionally emerge to defeat our best social physics models. Fortunately, the models are not really in danger because the data tells us that deviations from our regular social patterns occur only in a few % of the time, right? So he kind of sidesteps it, doesn't really need to deal with it. So better at rhetoric, much better than Skinner, and that ushers in this whole view. We're already at 8:20, so we're kind of going over this book. I want to say it's like 800 pages or so. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. I'll get some comments. So we pretty much blast it through. You know, we went over a little bit. I think I'll conclude there.
Do you think that we need to have a third?
There was only 3 more chapters. I like this chapter, this right to sanctuary. But it's basically your right to your privacy is gone, but she makes an argument that privacy is a good thing. Like, let's just say here, one empirical study that makes a point. We're talking about privacy and psychological functions of privacy. Darrell Peterson defines privacy as a boundary control process that invokes the decision rights and associated with restricting and seeking interaction. Peterson's research identifies 6 categories of privacy behavior: solitude, isolation, anonymity, reserve, and intimacy with friends, and intimacy with family. A study shows that these varied behaviors accomplish a rich array of complex psychological privacy functions considered salient for psychological health and development success, right? So there's a penalty for not having sanctuary, which is privacy, which is your Fourth Amendment to right to not have search and seizures, your private effects. That's really what this chapter is about. And I found this chapter was a pretty strong argument against surveillance capitalism. But I think that's it. I think we did a decent job of covering this.
It's very dense.
Yeah.